lower treble and the upper bass, so it becomes a little confusing there. Okay, so in this particular diagram, I improved this diagram by the way I was breaking up I broke this up into two. So let's go ahead now. We look at chart 515, modal clefs. So now we're at the modal clefs that we were talking about, and we also have some offsets to talk about. So the modal clefs, all right, we're still on this same particular diagram where I didn't break the two clef stacks into two, but we'll get to that if we hang in there. The modal clefs, again, are modal chords. So we have a G7 there, we have an A7 right here, we have an E7 there, we have a B half diminished 7, we have an F major 7th for the treble clef, and the upper treble we have another G7. It's just divided up a little more clearly in this, and I also show it with the keyboard here, with the piano keyboard here. So we divided it up. So here's our G7 down here, G to G modal. Okay, then we go to the bass clef itself. That was low. See, it says lower treble down here. That is a mistake. I fixed that more than once. Okay, apparently I didn't go back enough charts. I fixed it on 515 and 516. That's lower bass right down here. Okay, so for the purposes of keeping the lesson short enough, remember we got about like 10 charts to cover on one lesson, so we're all over the place. But I had made a mistake and I had put this as lower treble clef. Sorry, blooper there. That's not right. Okay, that is not lower treble clef. That is lower bass clef. Okay, that is lower bass clef. So it's not lower treble clef right there. Okay, it's not even deleting. So we were talking about. Let's jump ahead and talk about how we could split this into two here. So now we have the bass stack here. Notice I've improved and I fixed those mistakes, but I didn't go back enough charts. I always go back to the charts if I can fix a mistake. Just I made like 6 charts on this subject, dividing the clefs up into different things. Maybe dividing them up into the inner notes. Maybe the inner notes plus 1 on the bottom to make a modal scale. Maybe, and then in this particular case, we have in 517, we have cage shapes. Okay, so we actually have cage shapes here, but notice in 517 here we have long cage shapes. So 5A would go, we're including on that clef the bottom note here. So we're going G, we're doing a G7 there, right? We're doing the A string shape, 5A string shape. Key is C, so G is the 5th. 5A to RE to 4C. So we've got 3 long string shapes there. So my first attempt where I said, oh, I fit this thing properly. Yeah, I did this right. Let's look at what we got here. I actually split the keyboard into 2. Now we have lower bass clef down here. In bass, this is the same set of keys that we're working with here. From this F to way low C root to this F to lower C root to this G, you know, can go to any note we want, but to middle C. Alright, and then we'll go up to upper C, then we'll go up to way up C. and we're going up to this G. So this whole thing covers this much. That's a pretty good amount. But remember that it's 88 keys, so these lower clefs and upper clefs can be enormous. I'll get to that later on in my studies, right? Because in guitar it doesn't matter. It doesn't seem to matter. We don't need to go that low. Bass fiddle, that kind of thing, yes. That's why I'm adding notes on the bottom. Okay, and of course guitars that go way up, I'm adding notes on the top when I can. So I'm expanding the sizes of the upper treble, okay, but to suit my needs, to know how we're dividing this up. So let's say we wanted to divide it up into 10 notes. This would be a great place to start. We could just add notes to the top, or 12 notes. We could add notes up here, but it would be a problem with the treble clef. How are we going to, and then we'd have overlap there. We'd have overlap if we had too many notes. No problem with overlap as long as we account for it in the diagrams, which means when there's overlap and we want to look at the fret notes, then we're going to have to divide the fretboards similar to the way we do with the cage system. Divide it up into 5 fretboards, the C fretboard, the A fretboard, the G fretboard, the E, when we're initially looking for those shapes, and those shapes alone, because they're going to overlap and it'll become a big mess. So here we have lower bass now. I've got it right. I'm sorry we don't have the previous diagrams. We can just imagine that this says lower bass. Okay, let's just imagine that says lower bass. So we'll leave that up. This is the lower bass cloth. Cloth. This is the lower bass cloth. This is colored notes piano. Okay. These are the colors of the notes. These little notes, they're the same colors, hopefully, but the B note up here is kind of a dark blue instead of a blue-gray, but same thing, because I made that earlier before I finally settled in on the colors. So the Modal Clef's long pattern here, the Aeolian 6/7 root, Phrygian 3/4/5, Locrian 7 root 2, Lydian is 4/5/6. The Mixolydian is 5/6/7. The Ionian and the Dorian we don't have. This is just a double of the Mixolydian because of the way that the clefs are defined in this particular breakdown. And then we bring this. So let's first do this over here. Remember, this is the lower bass clef. Okay, we can do that. Okay, so I just put that on here, but it's not gonna be saved for our discussion here. So again, and this looks like the modals. So we've got a complete Mixolydian scale down here. So we're going to call lower bass clef. We're going to define it by the G Mixolydian scale, key of C. Remember, like cage is in the key of C. Cage is in the key of C. It's not in the key of A. It's not C. It's not A, B, C sharp, E, F sharp system. It's not in the key of A. Cage is in the key of C. C, D, E, G, A. So we're working the key of C here. G to G is the Mixolydian. That's the lower bass clef. Definitions. This is how we're splitting the clefs up. Bass is on the bottom, treble's on the top. Aeolian is 6/6 here. Now how are we going to get this? Upper treble, Locrian is 7/7. This is upper bass clef. Uh-oh. Okay, fix that. So again, apparently I got a little confused because I'm working on trying to get this theory. I get the theory going in my head, what's important going in my head to me, and I'm not, following through with these diagrams, because sometimes people don't even pay attention to the keyboard diagram. So upper bass clef is the Locrian here, and then lower treble clef. Notice it overlaps with the bass clef and the upper. So I put this on the bottom, this on the top. You know, I'm no stranger. You're no stranger to these charts with Cage, with the overlap C, A, G, E, D. So you put the A on top, the A shape, then G, and then E shaped on top. And I've dealt with all kinds of stacks up of labelings. So this is very easy and very obvious. These are your major sevenths that go around the keyboard. And we have to talk about this. But anyway, this is how we break it up here. In the modal breakup of the 6 segments of the clefs. Lower bass, bass clef, upper bass. Lower treble, treble clef, upper treble. 6 parts. So we have a Lydian on the upper treble. We have a mixolydian on the upper treble, and treble becomes a Lydian. We can look at that. How we actually splitting it up is right here. Okay. Here's our G to F for that. Okay. But see, this is still the old stack. We don't have it split up the way we'd rather see it. So let's see if we can go up one here and see if we have that double stack here. Sounds like a Wendy's burger, right? But now in this diagram, I've managed. Okay, in this diagram, I've managed to split up the stack, but now we're not defining it in modal scales. This is clef segments defined by triple string shapes. 9 notes each, not just defined by modal scales. Triple string shapes have one more note than modal scales. So let's say we're looking at a G7. Okay, but if we wanted to split it up into 3 string shapes, we could go like 5A, RE, 4C. Right there, we want one note higher. So it's just 9 right there. 5A, RE, 4C. We want one note higher. Here's the overlap. You can see why we've split it up into 2. So we need this diagram to help us eventually get to what we need to get to. So let's back up a minute, back over to 515, and look at the treble and the bass with my first attempt to show you where these clefs actually are. So here's the lower treble clef down here, and then we have Lydian for the treble clef up here. Where is your fret nut? Right here. Regular tuning fret nut, down C tuning fret nut. This is your regular tuning. This would be an E, would be the 3rd of the key of C. Remember, how about it's in the key of C. And then upper treble would be again in the mixolydian, keeping the red color, although it's not going to stay a mixolydian depending on how we define it.